Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here, and get ready for Gnosis. Well, we're going to talk about Albert Abrams, often called the father of radionics. His major two machines were the radioclast and the oscilloclast. So, which he designed to assist in the diagnosis and treatment of disease. Now, it's important to understand who this man is. And he's born in that very interesting little time where people tend to die young. And I think we need to note that. And that's the late 1800s. He was born in 1863 and died in 1924. We'll get back to that again. But there seems to be something within there, and people born basically through those times. He died within those times. But people that are born in 1910, 1920, all these areas seem to quite a few people die young. On the other hand, just as a note, we're kind of looking at it as a bigger picture. Still, people from ancient times on have been living into their late 80s. So, but who is this guy? I don't know if people know it, but he was a medical doctor and a well-recognized and respected medical doctor. You could say he was a boy genius. So he came from a very wealthy merchant family of San Francisco. And went to medical school at a very young age, graduated from Medical College of the Pacific, and then in 1881, and then he went to Heidelberg, Germany, and graduated there in 1882. Only a year? Strange with all these things. Who knows? He was also, Abrams was awarded an MD by Cooper College in 1883, and he served on the teaching staff of the college for a total of 14 years. So, I mean, this is a person who has been well-trained and well-recognized. And he was part of USC Medical School. He was appointed different. I mean, this is a very well-recognized person. I don't want to go into it. It's all boring as far as I'm concerned. This is a well-respected medical doctor, whatever that means. The bottom line is this isn't some goofball chiropractor or some uneducated person entering the medicine field, a person selling snake water, off the back of a wagon as we see in bad movies, or someone coming out with their own idea and have nothing in the backgrounds. So, this is has to be fully understood. And he was involved in certain alternative stuff in the beginning. He was heavily involved with and inspired by chiropractic and osteopathic. He developed different techniques of doing this. And he wrote a book on it, of course. He wrote a bunch of books that are medical books that aren't dealing with the ERA, as he called it, the electric reaction of Abrams, which would become known as Radionics. So there's a whole bunch of very medical books written by him that are very unusual. You got to remember this is pre-patent medicine, so to speak. Pre the influence of the American Medical Association, which started to come into force with patent medicine at the turn of the century. So there wasn't things. You had to come up with unique ideas, manipulate the body. Many people were told to go to places like the sea or the desert, get pure air, relax to heal yourself. So all of this was how, and there were many different treatments. This was also a time when electricity was just hitting the populace. So there was many electrical devices made by people to put electrical current through you so that this would assist in your healing. And as we know, the human energy in the body is semi-electrical in a way. So there is an electrical component. We are kind of this electrical chemical battery. The way our mind works is shooting electrical signals around the head. When that stops, you have a seizure and you turn off. So, I mean, all of these things are just happening now. And the so he was coming up with all these things, had some great ideas, and I guess he was able to do it. He was very successful. He started off very young, and of course, his family had money. I don't know how much of it he had to use of that because he was being paid, I'm assuming, excellent wages as a teacher, as a doctor. So, he was also elected vice president of the California State Medical Society in 1889 and became president of the San Francisco Medico-Clerical Society in 1893, and basically was known and became a respected expert in neurology. So, which again kind of hooks into the nerves, the movement of energies. So I don't want to go too much into this. As I said, it just kind of gets boring. But I hope everybody understands who this guy was. So he was a wealthy, his family was wealthy, merchant class from San Francisco. He was very young and graduated from medical school and shortly trained not only in the United States, but also trained in Europe. So if there's anything different going on in Europe at that time, well, he got trained in that as well. Tracking him, we really just don't know what happened in terms of, how many people went to him, what kind of cure. These are all the problems which you have to wonder why people aren't keeping better records. But this is why research is so expensive and so difficult, people. You've got to have people that keep research. You've got to have records. You've got to do studies. This all costs a lot of money because you have to pay a lot of people to do this. Even in modern times here, computers can't do this. You have to have people to take records, do studies, etc. And this goes on all the time where doctors are asked to do that. Matter of fact, I reported recently on a whole bunch of doctors that take all this money from drug companies to do research and then don't do it, which is kind of mind-boggling and how irresponsible. One of them was for an asthma drug for children. This is the kind of regular doctor credibility you have. Now, certainly, Albert Abrams was certainly more credibility than that. So, he was trying to help people with new methods. And he went through a whole series. It's a very complicated belief system that he had. He developed, which used to be done up until probably the 80s, where a doctor would tap on your abdomen and listen to it. And this was a technique that he developed to detect certain diseases. This is no longer done from what I understand, but he was the one that originated that. So techniques that he did and the credibility of his practices were so high level that they were used even up to modern times and may still be used today. So, but he got into a whole bunch of different areas. People think he was just into radionics. Well, that isn't true. And as he said, he's got 8 or 10 huge medical books. These will be available on our website for sale for a few dollars for those that want to read these more complicated texts, as well as his booklet on ERA, as he called it, the electric reaction of Abrams, which is not, as we traditionally call, radionics today. Now, he had his own way of doing it. His machines started out to be very complicated, and he used to compare a healthy person energetic levels to a sick person and could tell the difference between the two and be a way of diagnosing. Now you got to remember this was pre-blood test. This was pre-everything. So there was nothing to do. So people were clamoring of what can we do to diagnose a person? How do we know if they're sick? How do we treat them properly? So all the stuff that we know as blood tests and diagnostic tools that we have today are all relatively rare. These are the kind of medical advances that we have. A certain amount of diagnostic equipment has been developed by the medical industry to the benefit. The problem is you find out that you're ill and it's okay, we know you're sick, you're going to die. They haven't found anything else. They haven't found any cures or any decent treatments. Yeah, they can tell you've got cancer or see a lump here or see a lump there or whatever else it is. They can tell whether your blood's goofy of one thing. You got too much in it, not enough in it, whatever. Well, this is all helpful. The problem is, what do you do then? The medical industry, we got nothing. We got a pill here. So the whole idea is things developed into this pharmaceutical industry that's turned into the nightmare monster it is today. But of course, there's practicalities to that. If you can give somebody a pill instead of having them come in for machine treatments or do so many other therapies, well, it makes everything, should make everything very inexpensive and easy. So, you can understand how things went in that direction. On the other hand, are these pills good for you? They don't cure anything, they treat symptoms. That's what a definition of a medicine is. For the treatment of symptoms is what the law says. So I don't know how many people know that, but it was brought to my attention just recently in terms of it sticking in my head. So they're not there for the cure of anything. So this is a problem, and a lot of these treatments that you got directly from somebody were meant to be more cures. You can't go there all the time. So people were getting involved in this whole area. I guess he had the money to push things. He was very well known. And at the time of the height of his machines and everything else, which was in the early 1900s, there were 3,500 practitioners using his machines. In that day and age, and with the population in the United States at that time, that's a fairly significant group of people. Of course, there were those from the AMA, the drug company people that were sponsored by, that's who put the AMA together, basically, and got their little kebab of medical mafia together who wanted to go against Abrams. Maybe they were jealous of him, they didn't like what's going on. And of course, the problem with all these kind of things that are operator dependent is that you run into all sorts of problems. And that is that how do these machines work? How can they be tested? Now, Abrams refused to be tested, knowing that he would be set up, kind of the Johnny Carson, Uri Geller type of thing. So he didn't really want to go and be tested by these people and felt that he would be treated poorly, which is one of the major problems that we have with all these things. Why should you trust any of these people who are trying to destroy you? On the other hand, you're almost forced to do this, and if you are able to produce results, well, they can always spin it on you. Of course, the unamazing Randy, the dumb bunkers and idiot skeptics have been tricking and deceiving people all the time. They'll take somebody in and skew the results against them, or they're just plain out and out lie. This is what Unamazing Randy did all the time. He made statements that were complete fiction to back up what his beliefs were. He was not seeking truth. Was Albert Abrams seeking truth? Well, certainly he made a lot of money from this, and we have to understand, well, was that important to him? And why didn't he offer these things at less expensive prices if he was so wealthy? Now, I don't know how wealthy he was or not, but you can't necessarily take your life fortune and start making machines and giving them away. You also don't necessarily have to charge a lot of money for them. It seemed like the actual cost to use these machines was relatively high for its time. I believe it was a couple of $100s a month that he would charge doctors. I'm not entirely sure. I've seen things thrown around that of these numbers. And apparently it was big business. Courses that he was offering in his particular type of therapy and ERA cost $200 in 1918. Now that was a fortune back then. Would be similar to about $3,500 now in our time. Well, that's a lot of money. I mean, $3,500 is a lot of money even today. If something costs $3,500, you just don't pull out your checkbook. That's a chunk of change. So his cost for all of his stuff was very high. Now, why is this? Some people stated that he was trying to fund his own hospital, and he wanted to put together his own hospital. You have to wonder why he couldn't get help with that, investors from other doctors, etc., and why he had to do that. I don't know. Did money motivate him? Was this a big, let's grab money? Well, I don't know what his financial background. Apparently, he died with a fair amount of money in his bank account in terms of the fact that he willed it to start an organization. So it wasn't that he didn't have money, it appears. And of course, just because Daddy had money doesn't mean he had money. So I don't know where the family fortune was when he died. Now, all of this stuff is near impossible to find out. It also takes a humongous amount of time to do this. Again, this is the cost of research that is very difficult to obtain the funding to do this. So this is why we're pushing so much recently that, hey, you've got to get money to an organization who can take the time to do the research. And nobody has done this. This is an entire field. There's minimal to no support. So if you go out there and want to read all of his books, see what he was about, try and figure out what he was doing with his machines, find them. And there are machines in different museums around the United States. And of course, what he did was fill his machines up with gunk, so it was near impossible to figure out what was in them or on them. This is something that most manufacturers did, and some do it even today. So that's a difficult task as well. Now, was there anything special in there? Was he getting results? Well, again, we have zero information that can be found. Now, there's newsletters I have and everything else, but this is, you have to take 2 or 3 months and just read everything you can to figure out if there's anything. But nobody has been keeping records in this area. And if there was records, these kind of things, particularly positive records, well, they'll disappear. They'll be destroyed by those seeking to destroy him. So we need to understand that. But we have to understand, first and foremost, this is a medical doctor. So we have to give him the credit that he went through this system, not only in the United States, but he went in a foreign country. So he was educated twice and has medical degrees. So we have to give him credit for that. And there's several medical doctors, and people just want to laugh this off. Andrew Practitioner was an MD, a medical doctor. Okay, very important. People understand that. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who did so much spiritualist research, the author of Sherlock Holmes, was a medical doctor. Okay, so it's important to understand that, they had to graduate medical school, they had to get a license, etc. So let's start there. So these are not boobs. Now let's move into the fact that, well, there is no pills, there isn't anything else. And even if there was, is that the only treatment we have? And what are the problems with that? As we know today, there are numerous medications. Some of them are extremely expensive, prohibiting the use of them, and many of them are highly toxic. What are we supposed to do with junk like that? Well, so we're trying to find something different would be your idea, something that is less. That's why so many people take supplements, herbs, etc. This is all part of the process of trying to find better ways of doing things. But in these times, there was no... So it wasn't only Abrams, but there were numerous other people coming out with all sorts of different types of machines, little machines that gave you electric shocks, diathermy machines that heated you up. So there were all sorts of little things that were done, including numerous health quote organizations, or actually places you would go, spas that we call them kind of today, which would give you different treatments of what was available then. And of course, one of them that started to move out was him and his ERA and his other treatments. He had the reputation, probably the money to push and get salesmen out there to go and talk to other doctors. So there was a whole factor here that allowed him to move ahead. There were many, many producers of radionic machines out there, by the way. And you can see some of them that are available on the channel for YouTube. So there was a bunch of them, and a bunch of different machines made by a whole bunch of different people in his era, talking about the 1920s, etc. After that, there were still several manufacturers of radionics, but the big problem which happened, and of course, was the fact of his death in 1924 on January 13th, that he died of pneumonia at the age of 60. Well, this always is a problem that I have personally. But, I understand it from two levels. But he was connected. He knew a lot of people. He should have been getting help from other practitioners, unless he was too egotistical to ask people to treat him. Now, one of the problems with people who are involved in these areas is that they are too busy doing work and helping other people to help themselves. And of course, this is an area I even fall into myself personally. You tend not to use the stuff on yourself. You're telling everybody else what to do. This is some sort of psychotic problem that everyone has who's pushing a certain reality out there. That they tend not to use the stuff as much as they should, that they are trying to help other people with. So this is a very difficult situation and something that should be noted. But here's a guy who is a medical doctor who knew hundreds of other doctors and sold his equipment to a whole bunch of people. It could be the fact that he just was embarrassed to go to anybody and ask for help. After all, you sold the machines. Can't you cure yourself? Didn't he have associates that could treat him? Because the other problem is working on yourself is difficult, whether it's magically or in any other way. Trying to do things for yourself is difficult, especially with stress and helping other people, and you can be in a very bad mental condition. So there is a problem there, and I always tell practitioners that, look, you can't work on yourself, you're too emotionally involved, so you should be having somebody else that can actually assist you. Again, this is rare. But here, at the young age, and this is, I don't know, he's probably one of the youngest radionic practitioners' deaths that there is at the age of 60. I think only it was Tansley who was the only person that I'm aware of who was a radionic practitioner who died younger. So he died close to, what was that? Let me see here quickly. He died at 54 from cancer. So I guess he even beat, if you call that winning, Abrams. Because he contacted cancer, and the famous radionic author, Tansley. What was his first name? David Tansley. And his work can be found everywhere. He dealt with chakras and other things, which is quite interesting. But here we go again with something that, look, this was pneumonia. This was something that was common out there. He should have had treatment, Abrams, to take care of himself, to heal this, or known somebody that could help him. Yet not. So this is not something that's overly new. Yet it is deadly. Every time you get lung infections, these can turn very deadly very soon, as we know with recent pandemics and problems. Once they get into the lungs, they can be very deadly. So understanding all that, we have to look back at what happened to him. Now, so apparently there's also jive that he was sent. And I don't know if it was him. I've heard stories that it was Ruth Drown. Now it was him. He had one of his major practitioners was tested who failed terribly. From Scientific American, they went to him, and he was supposed to be one of the major people working with Abrams, and they tested him, and he failed horribly. So they say. These are the kind of things, though, you hear the same stories about Ruth Drown, which came many years after Abrams. So I don't know what the truth there is or not. Also is that they had sent him blood to diagnose at a distance that actually came from a chicken, and he diagnosed it to have ridiculous multi-diseases. It had syphilis, diabetic, etc. It's hard to believe that you would even send back such a diagnosis as that, because these combined things would have pretty much killed you. So I just don't get it. And they claim that this was not from a human, but animals can have these diseases too. We don't know that if these things were possibly diseases that these animals actually had. But you heard this, the same story was heard, as he said, on Ruth Drown. I'll cover her in another talk. So there was going to be a trial where he was going to be called in as a witness, and he died before the trial went to court. So we don't know what his testimony would have. Yeah, supposedly the AMA member sent a blood sample to Abrams, to an Abrams practitioner, not Abrams himself, and got back a diagnosis that the patient had malaria, diabetes, cancer, and syphilis. The blood sample was in fact from a Plymouth rooster, Plymouth cock rooster, rock rooster. Similar samples were sent to other practitioners, and a few found themselves facing fraud charges in court. In a case scheduled in Jonesboro, Arkansas, Abrams was called to be a witness, but he died before the trial began. So, and Food and Drug Administrators opened some of his boxes after his death, and they found that they had just minor parts in them. One was a small radio wave transmitter. Another one had a small magnetic field in it. But of course, we know that large, powerful fields don't do anything as well. So I'm not sure what was there. And of course, you're not going to have anybody understand these things because they're not made electronically sense out of them. As a matter of fact, they make no electronic sense. So apparently they did some of this stuff in the practitioners, and we don't know. Again, they're sending out to random practitioners. Are they using the technologies right? It's sad if they're doctors and they're not using it right and they weren't trained properly, but this goes on even today. Were they using this equipment right? What were they doing? After all, Abrams certainly was charging enough money monthly and for his products in general. Why wasn't there better follow-up? So all of these things you have to scratch your head and wonder, but life isn't that easy. You try and run a good organization. It doesn't mean that you necessarily can. And of course, he was a doctor. He wasn't necessarily a businessman. Did he have good business people with him? How big was his organization, etc.? Well, we don't know. So all of these things became a problem as we get into bigger pictures of what's going on. So we need to look at all these things to further understand. So we just don't know, and the time to really get into this, read all the literature, figure out what it is, there's a museum that has a lot of these turn-of-the-century electronic devices in them. And I forget where this is. I always planned on going there, somewhere in the Midwest, somewhere near Minnesota, I think, where the inventor of the pacemaker, whose company name escapes me, it's a very famous company now. It's made a fortune because of that invention, has a museum of all these electronic type products because he put together the pacemaker, which is a small electronic device. And it's a very famous company even today because they make all sorts of things that help people in these areas. So we just don't know. We don't know the evidence always looks bad when you get these kind of odd reports of what was going on and how government agencies step in. And we don't know how legitimate they are or not in terms of were they being paid to make sure they harass people? Were these people that incompetent? Because this is pretty much the exact same story that was brought against Ruth Drown. And Ruth Drown was treating a lot of people. Was this the pre-internet? Well, it was. So did word get around that people could continue to treat, not get well, and people would pay these people? You would think that word of mouth would kill anything. How did Ruth Drown stay in business? How did 3,500 doctors spend all this money on these machines, and I believe these were monthly fees, if they didn't work? Where did they get the money from? So all of these things, the business aspects come up, the legal aspects, and of course, just plain and simple research. What is happening? What really happened in this entire area? So we just don't know. And as usual, we don't know the success rate that Abrams was having. Abrams always tried to cooperate, but when push came to shove, he didn't because he knew he was being set up. But how do you get around that? Why didn't he put together research studies to show that his equipment worked? How come his underlings, if we are to believe the story, failed to produce any kind of decent results? So what does this what does this all mean when we put everything together? It means it's a giant confused mess. And it's amazing how things hold on for long periods of time. Here is a technology that was in use, yet it's still going today, and people claim all sorts of results from it. There are people still pushing that. The only person who was able to get by all this was Galen Hieronymus, who to his last days was kept in a certain level of credibility. And there was a support from the electrical engineering community that he was part of. And even to this day, Peter Kelly's organization is still selling his products and teaching you how to use them. What does it mean? So we get down to the point that we just don't know. So these are problems that we all have to look into. But again, nobody's going to fund projects like this. So, and I'm not sure that any of this matters. The bigger picture is kind of understood what radionics is, but it's such a primitive art form today. It's the machines that I keep getting, no matter how well they're built or how poorly they're built, don't seem to have any sense to it. Some people don't seem to understand the difference between electric Hertzian energies, which would be kind of like an electrical appliance, or what are considered Rife frequencies, which are Hertzian in nature and can be measured easily with a good meter, to radionics, which is not a radio wave or any other wave. It is a radiation emanation, you could say, which is completely different. So you're not producing anything with the radionic machine in terms of putting out waves or energies that can be measured of what the core of it, because there is no way of measuring it except with pendulums. So the whole idea is, how do you amplify them? How do you produce them? How do you project them out? Well, all of this is something that is unknown at this time. So it's very difficult to do this, but this is how bad radionics has gotten. People are putting out in large numbers non-electric units, which are basically psychic crutches, and give you a pattern of the way the dials and wires are set up that amplify the circuit, but it is non-electric. Now, this does work, although at a low energetic level and difficult to produce. So, results from. It's hard to break through without some sort of serious amplification beyond just the old type. And what worked in the 1950s doesn't work today in terms of the crowded energetic field that's out there between cell phones, satellites, and everything else. So these kind of things tend to interrupt and hurt the actual reality of all the energies that are out there that tend to block these other ones. So, and of course, nobody can legally, medically do anything. And of course, nobody's bothered to go out in the agricultural market and write this stuff up and prove it either. So, which you'd think would be something that could be done. But here again, we get into the problems that the chemical pesticide industry, Monsanto, and its parent company, Bayer, is a billion-dollar company selling billions of dollars of all these toxic chemicals around the world. So you're just not going to come out and all of a sudden tell people they don't need pesticides. So there's always a problem here. It's all about corruption. It's all about the lack of individual interest and funding of real research, and it leaves us to the point that we are. Because what we're left with now is really a corrupt, toxic mess of stuff that doesn't really work. It's all basically a fraud, and whatever does work produces worst or terrible results and toxic aftermath. So what do we do with all that? So the point is that things like this, as I've said with other things, other practitioners are something that should be welcomed by the medical industry to find answers, but it has nothing to do with that. The medical industry is just that. It's a medical mafia. They're only interested in making huge profits. They seek nothing but profits, and they don't care about anybody's health. And there's even been alleged medications and drugs that have been made up to make people sick, so they would have to take other medications. The failure rate of prescription medications in almost every field is horrendous, and the toxic problems are endless. So what happens with all of this? Well, we're back to the same old thing. But people should know, as instead of listening to dumb bunkers and skeptics, they understand that these people, like so many other in the field, are very credible people. They're not some snake oil salesman off the back of a wagon in 1820. These are not any of this. These are credible people that went to credible schools, that ascended high in their profession, who got into areas that were different and frowned upon because others couldn't control it as much. So he was a big business starting out there. He was making a lot of money, and this rubbed the salt in the wound of the patent medicine producers and the American Medical Association, who was supported by the patent medicine people, from what I understand. So this came to a business fight. And then, of course, there never seems to be any kind of credible demonstrations. There's never any lists of people that are healed. What did he have to lose? Why didn't he keep these records? To the same point with Ruth Drown and so forth. Well, you're doing all these practices. Where's your records of success? Where is your before and after diagnosis? But you got to remember, again, we didn't have diagnostic tests to do this too well. And there was a minimal amount of blood and other things that could be done back in those days, unlike today. So verifying, having x-rays and everything else, this was something very new still back even in the 60s. All of these things were kind of new and very expensive. So none of this apparently was done. And there's no even casual records of that. I treated X and X and got this result. Who knows what happened to all of their records? Whether it's Ruth Drown, so many other people, or Albert Abrams with his 3,500 doctors using the system, we have nothing to verify from them. So what are we to make of all this? Well, we certainly can't condemn anybody because we have no records at all. We certainly can't sell, well, this is iffy. Well, there was no records. Instead of the American Medical Association coming in there and say, hey, look, let's verify that this works. Let's see some medical records. Start keeping research and data. They just went out and attacked them with the money they got from the drug companies. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So the whole idea is nobody was seeking truth to say, hey, does this work or does it not? I've heard all sorts of supposed research done on herbal preparations and other things, yet I really don't know where that comes from. They tested things like the anti-cancer herbal Esseax and said that it failed. Well, I don't know. You hear these things, but why aren't they better publicized? Why don't we have that? And so many other research studies I hear about herbals and other things that seem to have failed. They tested it here. Well, I mean, why aren't these made more public, or where are these things? Because it's difficult to find. So that's what the American Medical Association should have done. Well, let's see you verify it. They should have contacted Abrams and say, hey, look, this is quite unusual. What proof do you have that this technology works? And you need to start collecting data of what these machines are achieving instead of just collecting money and selling them. What are they doing? Where are the reports from the doctors? How many people have used this? 3,500 doctors? That's a huge amount of doctors that should have produced a huge amount of research. Where is it? Well, it doesn't seem to exist, at least so I know. But there's an awful lot that was written by Abrams, his organizations, etc., in newsletters and other things, which I have recently obtained. Well, what do they say? Are there reports in there? Apparently, nobody on either side has claimed that there is reports. So certainly, if you would think the people who supported him would have come out and say, well, we have all this data, and you would think the other ones would come out and say, no, well, I haven't heard any from either side. So here again, people, when they have an axe to grind and they're not seeking truth, will fall on whoever their pocketbook is beneficial to them. And that's exactly what happened here. But we don't have any proof. I can't give a great amount. Now, I do understand the function and form of traditional radionic units in terms of their efficiency and their working, and they are fascinating, and they do produce some very interesting results. There does seem to be something that needs to be put a lot of energy into. I've never worked in the, quote, healing field because I don't really deal with physical energies. But, healing is something that everybody needs. But it's not traditional healing. It's unorthodox and totally disparaged energetic informational fields that people don't believe in. So you're not really doing any kind of traditional practices. And I don't know why this should in any way bother the medical institutions. The problem is, and their gripe is that people lose valuable time trying things that have no credibility. That's the answer to it all. So if you spend 6 months going through some sort of vibrational energy treatment, well, that's 6 months you've lost getting better treatment somewhere else, and that could be critical to you. Well, I don't buy that in the bigger picture because they're the ones that tend to kill you the quickest. So we need to have an open field here of non-invasive where things can be researched, but there should be money poured into this. It doesn't cost that much. It's similar to the psychics in the remote viewing programs, the psychic programs that have been by the government. You're talking about the cost of less than one tank to run an entire psychic division. It's ridiculous not to try this stuff. The same thing with researching this area. It costs pennies compared to what research is in producing patent medicines. So we run into all these types of things that need to be looked into and proper, but nobody cares. It's all about making money, and the public is too ignorant, too complacent, and plain too stupid to do anything about it. And that, of course, is with almost every problem. If we end corruption, which includes the horrible corruption in the medical industry and the toxic poisons they give to the public, the poor way of getting new technologies to the marketplace for people to actually use different things and move even away from drugs, we should figure something else. And when we do that, we will see things majorly change. But it all stops with ending corruption and not allowing the money forces to actually dictate what's going to go on, because they're only caring about their pocketbook. Until next time.